Hello and welcome to another episode of the Kickstarter Weekly. This week's episode is going to look at games that are completing their funding between March 28th and April the 3rd. Now this is a big week. In fact, last week I had no campaigns to talk about, so I focused pretty much just on the games that I'd played, and luckily I had a lot of those. I had 10 games last week that I'd played. And I had so many games to talk to you about last week that I actually left one out. So I'll be talking to you about that game this week, along with one other game that I played during this week. And then we'll be looking at 9 different Kickstarters that are going to be completing their funding this week. So it's very different from last week, where I had none. But before I get to those 9 games, let's talk about the 2 games that I actually played this week. We'll start things off with Role Player Adventures, which if you've been watching my other videos, you know I am in the middle of a campaign for this. This is a 12 scenario campaign if you include the optional side quest. You're really supposed to play it, I think, during the campaign, but you can go on that adventure at any point during the campaign. So if you do it early on, it's going to be harder. If you do it later in the campaign, it's going to be easier. But there are elements in that side quest to kind of adjust the difficulty. So we have finished the first 9 scenarios and that side quest, and we just have 2 scenarios left. Now, I don't want to talk about Roleplay Adventures too much because I've talked about it at length in the other videos, and if you really want to hear my opinions, you can go back. Plus, I will be talking about it again as soon as I finish that campaign, which I'm anticipating will be in next week's video. And at that point, I'll have finished the entire campaign, and I think I'll have, some more conclusive, concise thoughts. I will say, though, in general, maybe you haven't seen me talk about Role Player Adventures before, if you like Role Player, the dice drafting game, this is a really good kind of narrative exploration dungeon crawler version of it, and it has a campaign which is supposed to be variable. I think you're supposed to be able to play it multiple times and have different experiences. Based on what I've done so far, I don't see that really happening. I think the decisions that you make, while they will affect your campaign, you're not really seeing a lot of different stuff, I think, depending on which choices you make. So the choices that you do make will alter, your outcome to some degree, but I think if you go back and replay it, I don't think you're going to have that much of a different experience. There'll just be some cosmetic differences and maybe some differences in outcome, but you're still going to be playing the same main campaign. You'll just end up with some of the details being a little bit different. So we're enjoying it, although it is getting samey because you're kind of doing the same 1 or 2 mechanics over and over and over. The writing in the campaign is really strong. It's very clever and well written and a lot of fun to play. We're having a lot of fun playing through the campaign. I just don't know if the replayability is there, and I think I'll have a better idea in 2 more scenarios once we finish that campaign, and then I'll report back. But if you're looking for a one-time campaign adventure that has the same kind of dice placement and dice mitigation mechanics as in the original Role Player, I think you'll have a really fun time with this one. I guess the big question is just, is this a game to keep and replay, or is this a game that's really only worth a one-time experience? And for right now, I'm leaning towards the one-time experience. Maybe a second campaign after enough time has passed, and you can play with different characters, and maybe you'll not remember enough of it that it can kind of be fresh again. But I think at the maximum, you're probably looking at 2 playthroughs, and then I don't see the game really lasting beyond that. The other game was actually a holdover from last week, and a game that I forgot to talk about because I had so many other games to talk about. And that game is Vivid Memories. Vivid Memories is designed by Matthew Dunstan and Brett Gilbert, and they've worked together on a few other games, including Chocolate Factory and Elysium. And Elysium seems to be a game that is somewhat under the radar, but the more that you talk to people, you'll find out that some people actually have played it and they really like it. I think it's just a little bit of a sleeper hit. But this is another game from that same team. It's also got art from Andrew Bosley, who you probably know from Everdell and Tapestry, but he's worked on a ton of other games as well. But as I've already been saying in my most anticipated games of 2022 video series, an art style that is really just delightful. And I think Vivid Memories is a perfect place for that art. In Vivid Memories, players are drafting these plastic tokens off of a number of tiles that kind of spread out like a market. Each tile gets 4 tokens placed on it, and then players take turns drafting tokens. Now, they have to start at one end or the other, and they can either take 1, 2, or 3 tokens at a time. If they only take 1 token, then they'll also get to do something called a rewire action, which allows them to redistribute some of the tokens that they've already placed in their player board, which is structured to look kind of like a brain. If they take 2 tokens, they need to be matching tokens, the same color. And if they take 3 tokens, they need to be all of a different color. I believe there are 4 or 5, I think 5 different colored tokens in the game. So players will be getting these tokens, they'll be placing them in these player boards, and anytime they remove the tokens that are on a tile, they'll also get that tile. The game is played over 3 rounds, and at the end of each round, they will be able to trigger, I think it's 4 different powers on the tops of those boards. But if they have some of these tiles, then the tiles will kind of replace those powers. So they'll always be triggering 4 powers. They'll just be either using the kind of base brain powers, or they'll be using some combination of them in conjunction with the tiles that they've just drafted. Now, drafting a tile will give you an ability on that tile. Once you use it, you'll flip it over, you'll slot it into your brain board on the top, and then you'll be able to score the matching formation of a certain kind of grouping of tiles on their board. If they're able to score that, it comes off the board, and then that can also score them more points at the end of the game. It's a very simple game. Players are just drafting tokens, they're getting tiles, and then at the end of each of 3 rounds, they're triggering these powers on their board. And with the placement of the tokens that they've kind of got on their board, they're trying to create sort of strands across their brain that link different colors on different sides. And if they do that, they can flip some of those tokens into those spaces and then score more points off of those spaces. There's a little bit more going on than that, but that's kind of the general sort of decision making going on here. Now, it's a very colorful and pretty game, again with that delightful Andrew Bosley art, and it's very tactile. The pieces are wonderful to touch and play with and put in the player board. And it feels like a lighter game, but there is a good amount of crunch, I think, in the way that you distribute those tokens in your board and the way that you move them around. This is a case where you're never really going to be able to do everything that you want with these tokens. So the game playing decision happening here is, how do you best move these around and position them? You have a lot of things you can do, but how do you choose from those things to score the most and do the best? And it's a smaller game. It doesn't take up too much space. It's in a smaller box, not a tiny box, but a smaller box, kind of smaller than your typical, big square box that fits snug in a calyx cube. So it is on the lighter side, I think, but it does have these kind of crunchy decisions within that. And so for me, this is a really good game because it's quick to teach, it's easy to play. The rules are simple, but there's still a lot of really good decisions going on in that game. So if I'm going to rate these, I think you still probably want to come back next week to find out my final thoughts on Role Player Adventures, and perhaps I'll even eventually do a full review on it. But for right now, I'm just going to hang in there with an 8.0 on Role Player Adventures, and for Vivid Memories, I'm going to give it a 7.5. I do need to play Vivid Memories more. I've only played it once, so that 7.5 is just off of a first play. I don't know how that will change over future plays. It may change a little bit, but I feel fairly confident about that 7.5. I think within half a point at the most. So the first of the 9 campaigns that I'd like to bring your attention to today is for a game called Hamlet, a village building game. It had a minimum required funding goal of $22,000. It's currently sitting at $421,000, which is about 19 times that minimum required funding goal. It's pretty good. Hamlet is going to complete its funding on Tuesday, March 29th. It's a game for 1 to 4 players that plays in about 60 to 90 minutes. The complexity on this one is medium heavy, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium low. Now, this is a mid-weight competitive village builder. It's got network and route building, pick up and deliver, and tile placement. It's designed by David Churko, who's previously worked on And Then We Held Hands, Petrichor, and The Pursuit of Happiness, and it's also got a solo mode by Nick Shaw and David Turksey. The art on this game is by Yusuf Artoon, and it's being published by Mighty Boards. And their highest rated games on Board Game Geek include Days of Ire, Budapest 1956, Excavation Earth, and Petrichor. Pledging Hamlet is a fairly simple affair because there's only one pledge level. It's $61 and it's called the Founders Deluxe Edition. There's also no add-ons in this one, so literally that is what you're going to be pledging if you're pledging this game. Now, if you're in the continental United States, then shipping is being estimated at $13. That's going to bring your grand total to $74, and they're estimating delivery on Hamlet for December of 2022. The next game on the list is called Tiwanaku. It had a minimum required funding goal of $27,500. It's currently sitting at $88,000, which is about 3 times that minimum required funding goal. Now, Tiwanaku is going to complete its funding on Wednesday, March 30th. And then from then on, all the other games on this list, the other 7 games that I'm going to be talking to you about, all 7 of those games are completing their funding on Thursday, March 31st. So you might want to take a look through that list because that is a big amount of games that are all kind of funding consecutively. I think for a lot of people, they probably will need to make some choices if there are multiple games that they want to back just because everything's hitting all at once. Tiwanaku is a game for 1 to 4 players. It plays in about 30 to 60 minutes. Complexity on this one is medium light, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium high. Now, as to what kind of game this is, Jesse Anderson at Quackalope, I think, probably kind of made the best concise phrasing, which is that it's Minesweeper on steroids. So it's a deduction game. It uses a modular board. Now, it was previously called Pachamama, so if you'd heard about it previously and you kind of checked it out, this is the same game. And it does play kind of like Minesweeper, where you're using deduction to try to find different things on this board. And it's also got some really, I think, very pretty components that are kind of somewhere between earth tones, like there's some browns and grays in the player pieces, but also some kind of darker pastel colors. I think just kind of all around, component-wise and look, it's a very pretty little package. And I think if you like, Minesweeper and that kind of gameplay, this may be the best version of that, in the prettiest package. And it's got a nice insert and everything. It looks really nice. It's designed by Olivier Gregoire, who previously worked on Aya, Dreams, and Pyratoons. The art is by Raphael Samak, and it's being published by Sit Down, who you may best know from Bad Bones, Echo, and Magic Maze. And I think Magic Maze, which I believe a lot of people know of Magic Maze, even if they haven't played it, I think that's probably a pretty good comparison for the kind of game and the kind of gameplay that you're going to find in this one. Now, much like Hamlet, there's only one pledge level for this game. It's $60. It's called Tiwanaku Deluxe. There's also no add-ons for this campaign as well. And if you're in the continental US, shipping is being estimated at $6. That'll bring your grand total to $66, and they're currently planning on delivering Tiwanaku in October of 2022 this year. That brings us to League of Dungeoneers, which is the first of our 7 games that are going to be funding on Thursday, March 31st. Now, this one also had a minimum required funding goal of $27,500. They're currently sitting at $400,000 on this campaign, which is about 15 times that minimum required funding goal. League of Dungeoneers is for 1 to 4 players. Games play in about 1.5 to 3 hours. Complexity level on this is heavy, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at high. Now, they're billing this one as an old school solo co-op dungeon crawl with RPG elements, and there's no miniatures in this game. It's all standees. So I think there's a lot happening here. There's a lot of content, but they're going the standee and tile route, no miniatures, to try to cut costs down. The other thing, and the reason why the risk on this campaign is high, is because everyone associated with this is their first game, their first production, their first Kickstarter. So the designer, all of the artists, this is a first project for them. And I think, they've cut the risk a little bit by not, ramping up the costs with miniatures. But it's still a big game. It's still an ambitious game, and it's a first-time production. And those are the times, I think, where things can really go the most wrong if they're going to. I'm not saying that they will. I'm just saying people need to be aware that there may be more risk when you're dealing with people who haven't really done this before. And obviously, a lot of people have faith in this campaign anyway, or they're willing to just take a risk because they are up to $400,000 already. But it's just something to be aware of, that there may be a little bit more risk associated with something like this than if you're pledging the latest CMON game, which, CMON is a machine. They're going to deliver. Their campaigns get big and bloated and they're very expensive, but they're going to deliver those campaigns. With a smaller company like this and a bunch of first-timers on board, you never really know. You're just hoping, you're kind of evaluating everything. You're trying to see the cues that, they're responsible and they've done their homework and they know what they're doing. But I think anytime when you're in a situation for the very first time, there are going to be unexpected things that come up. Now, if you're, dealing with a group like Succubus Publishing, who did Madara, they handled everything so well, and they are a shining example, I think, of what first-time publishers can do. It's not always the case. League of Dungeoneers is designed by Michael Lundstedt, and there are a slew of artists on this one. That list includes Kevin Richard John Barry, Scott Betts, Dominic Critelli, Robert Adrian Hillman, Obsidian Fantasy Studio, Paper Mage, Refluo, Mark Turner, York Berlin, and the game is being published by Von Strauss Publishing. Now, for $70, you can pledge at the primary tier, which is going to give you the game, the stretch goals, and access to the pledge manager. For $149, you can pledge the all-in tier, which is going to add in a lot of other things. That includes 3D doors, which again are going to be standees, not miniatures, the Ancient Lands expansion, a character sheet pad, companions, compendium, and cards, a dice bag, a dice tray, metal coins, a scenario sheet pad, sleeves, the standees and their holders, spells and prayer cards, and a big neoprene world mat. Now, if you want to get some of those things, but not all of them, you can pledge at that first tier and then add on some things for their add-on prices, which are as follows. The standees are $18, and you'll get 400 of them. The 3D doors are $15, and you'll get 25 of them. The Ancient Lands expansion is $26. Metal coins are $18, and you'll get 92 of them. The companion expansion is $10. The prayer and spell cards are $9, and you'll get 71 of them. The pad of character sheets is $4. The pad of scenario sheets is $4. The dice tray is $8. The dice bag is $5. Sleeves are $12 for 394 of them. The big neoprene world mat is $7. It's really cheap for what it is. There's actually an option as an add-on to write a quest into the game, but that's going to run you $66. An extra copy of the rulebook is $16. The standard tiles kit is $38, and you can also get a PDF copy of the rulebook for $16. That seems a little odd to me because I think you could always go onto Board Game Geek and just download your own copy. But if you want their version, however they're formatting it, of the PDF, I mean, maybe they're formatting it in a more user-friendly way in the way that they're presenting it to you. But $16 for a PDF copy of the rulebook. Now, if you're in the continental US, they kind of have a narrow range for shipping. So if you're pledging at the lower tier, it's $33. If you're pledging at the all-in, it's $35. So I think they must be somewhat subsidizing that all-in tier with maybe a higher shipping rate on the lower tier. And then they're planning on delivering this game in December of 2022. Malhya, Lands of Legends, had a minimum required funding goal of $99,000. They currently have $450,000, which is almost 4.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Malhya plays 1 to 5 players. Games are supposed to take about 1 to 3 hours. The complexity associated with this game is heavy, and we're going to set the risk of this campaign at medium low. Now, this is a cooperative narrative storytelling game and dungeon crawler. It's got miniatures and multiple scenarios. And the way I like to kind of distinguish some of these games, these kind of narrative storytelling games, from games that are purely just dungeon crawlers. Dungeon crawlers usually involve moving your pieces around, fighting, combat, all that kind of stuff. When you do a storytelling and a narrative kind of exploration game, they tend to minimize the combat a little bit and have some things decided by choices that you make in some kind of a book and sometimes skill checks. So it kind of takes some of the rough edges, I guess, of a dungeon crawler off and streamlines it a little bit and maybe makes it easier for people to pick up and play who haven't played kind of an old school, heavy kind of crunchy dungeon crawler. I think it just makes it a little bit more accessible for everybody. If it's done well, they bring in a lot of different mechanics and they still have compelling gameplay. But that, taking that dungeon crawler type gameplay and pairing it with these exploration-focused narrative and storytelling games, I think does tend to simplify it and make it something that everyone can find a little bit easier to just pick up and play. Now, there are a bunch of designers on this one. Again, this is a case where this is really the first design for all of these people, and then the artist is one of the 4 designers. So the designers are Francois Denis, Nicholas Fuchs, Ludovic Rivol, and Cyril Turpent. And Cyril Turpent is also the artist. The publisher is La Boîte de Jeux, and they've previously published such games as It's a Wonderful World, Netatanka Deluxe Edition, and Outlive. There's really one pledge on this one. It's $155. It's called the Heroic Edition. That's the name of the pledge. But there are a few items that you can add on. You can get a sleeve pack for $16, which will give you 300 plus sleeves, enough sleeves for all of the cards in the game. You can add on a dice tray for $9 and an extra set of dice for $20. Continental US shipping is being estimated at $40, which will bring your total pledge amount to $195. And they're currently planning on delivering this one in July of 2023. So this one is more than a year out. From there, we go to Monster Pit. Again, also a Thursday, March 31st funder. They had a minimum required funding goal of $32,000. They're currently at about $33,000, so they're just over funding. It's like 1 times funding. However, if you haven't heard me say this before, from all the Kickstarters that I've looked at and studied, which has been most of them over the last several years, it usually happens that Kickstarter campaigns, crowdfunding campaigns, do about 2/3 of their business in the first 24 hours and 1/3 of their business in the last 24 hours. And then the middle is just kind of gravy. But when you take all of that middle and add it up together, it's almost inconsequential when you compare it with the first 24 and last 24 hours. So I would guess, considering they're at about funding right now, that they'll finish at about funding and a half. So probably about $48,000. So I'm not worried that this one is going to somehow fall back and not fund. I think the fact that they're at funding right now, a little bit over it, they still have the better part of a week left, including that last 24 hours. I'm still confident that this one will continue to fund. Monster Pit plays 1 to 5 players in about 1 to 2 hours. Complexity is medium light, and the risk associated with this campaign, we're going to set at medium low. Now, this is by the team behind the Catacombs games, including Catacombs and Castles, which are kind of like dungeony crawler themed games, but essentially they're really flicking games. That's what they are. They're action dexterity and flicking games with this kind of fantasy element to it. With this game, they're actually making a dungeon crawler. So they're taking some of the kind of theme from their previous Catacombs and Castles games, but they're making a real dungeon crawler with mechanics like dice drafting, hand management, and tableau building, and they've made a game that can be played true solo, co-op, or one versus many, with one of the players taking on the role of the big bad monster. It's designed by Nick Seddon and Aaron West, and Aaron West has previously worked on Catacombs, Catacombs 3rd Edition, and Catacombs and Castles. And the art is by Kwanchai Maria, who's worked on that series. So if you know the art of the Catacombs series, you're going to be familiar with Kwanchai Maria's art. It's really striking. It's got a lot of great colors and kind of thick line work. It's perfect for this kind of game. But you may also know Kwanchai Maria from some of the other games that he's worked on, which includes Cryptid, Dinosaur Island, In the Hall of the Mountain King, Sidereal Confluence, and Under Falling Skies. And Monster Pit is being published by Elzra Corp. They are the publisher of all the Catacombs games. Those are kind of their thing. So they, again, like the designers, have published Catacombs, Catacombs 3rd Edition, and Catacombs and Castles. Now for this one, we've got more pledges than the other games that we were talking about earlier. There's 5 main pledges for this one, and basically that's because they're giving you a couple different options for Monster Pit, and they're also giving you the ability to get some of the Catacombs stuff that's been published in the past. So for $54, the Monster Pit pledge level, you're going to get the game, stretch goals, pledge manager access. If you pledge at $80, which is the Monster Pit all-in, you're going to add to that pledge a neoprene playmat and a dice set. For $157, which is the Monster Pit plus Catacombs big box, we're going to go back to that first Monster Pit pledge level. So you'll get the game, the stretch goals, and the pledge manager access, but you won't get the neoprene playmat and you won't get the dice set. However, you will get a Catacombs big box, 3rd edition. For $182, you can pledge Monster Pit plus Catacombs 3rd edition big box. It's almost the same in name as the one that I just mentioned. It just specifies 3rd edition big box where the other one doesn't. And the difference is that this pledge level gives you an upgrade to the old big box, the previous version. So this is for people who already have the big box, but they have the older version, and they want to get these components that basically upgrade it into the new version. So you'll be getting a lot of the new stuff, but you'll be getting other things that upgrade some of the old things into the new things. It's actually more material, there's more components, which is why it's more expensive. The last pledge you're really going to want to consider is $324. It's getting expensive. And that is the Monster Pit plus Catacombs Big Box Plus. Now that's not the upgrade version, that's going back to the pledge 2 pledges ago, but it's going to add in some more things. Some of those things include 6 playmats for various players. You can play with up to 6 players. Everyone has their own playmat. And some previous expansions and promos that includes Caverns of Soloth, Resurrection, the Icebox, which is the stretch goals from the 2018 campaign, and Wildlands. Now, if you're pledging at a lot of these pledge levels, they're not including that neoprene playmat or the dice set. So if you want to get those as add-ons, it's going to be $17 for the playmat, $8 for the dice set. Continental US shipping is being estimated at $17, although my guess is that is for the less expensive pledges. So you may get more expensive shipping once you're going into some of those higher pledge levels. And then finally, Elzra Corp is planning on delivering this game in November of 2022. Next on the list is Motor City, also funding on Thursday, March 31st. They had a minimum required funding goal of $18,000. They're currently at $54,000, which is just about exactly 3 times that minimum required funding goal. This is a game for 1 to 4 players, plays in about 45 to 60 minutes. Complexity is medium heavy, and the risk associated with this campaign is medium low. Now this is a roll and write game, and it's game 3 in the Motor City Gameworks roll and write series. The first one is Fleet the Dice game, which was actually published through Eagle Griffin Games. And the second game in the series is Three Sisters. That was a Kickstarter that just recently delivered. I've actually played it a few times. I backed that one. I talked about it last week. And I've noticed in looking at this one that it's very similar gameplay-wise. I'm not sure that it's just a one-to-one retheming around the automotive industry, whereas Three Sisters was more farming, backyard farming. I don't think it's just kind of a reskin. I think there's more tweaking with mechanics, but it also looks very similar to some of the mechanics in Three Sisters and the way that the dice drafting and the kind of choices in the game work. I'm not sure that you would need both of those games. I think, and I'm hoping that if you do have both of them, there are enough design differences to make it worthwhile. But if you do already own Three Sisters, you may want to take a closer look and just make sure that the differences are enough for you. Now, Motor City is being designed by Adam Hill, who previously worked on Godspeed, as well as Ben Pinchback and Matt Riddle, who've worked on Fleet, Fleet the Dice Game, and Wasteland Express Delivery Service, as well as Three Sisters. The art is by Ilya Avakov and Marlies Behrens. Marlies Behrens worked on Ortis and Three Sisters. Motor City is being published by Motor City Gameworks. That's Ben Pinchback and Matt Riddle's company. It's fairly new. I think to date they're best known for publishing Three Sisters and Tiny Farms. There's only one pledge level for this campaign. It's $29. It's called the Motor City Kickstarter Edition. There are a couple of add-ons though. For $7, you can add on extra Motor City game pads. And for $5, you can add on the Rock Garden expansion, which is for Three Sisters. So just make sure if you're picking up that expansion that you have or are planning on getting the base game for Three Sisters. Continental US shipping is being estimated at $9, and Motor City Gameworks is planning on delivering Motor City in November of 2022. That brings us to Sentinels of the Multiverse Rook City Renegades expansion. This campaign had a minimum required funding goal of $50,000. They're currently at $324,000, which is about 6.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Again, this one's also going to fund on Thursday, March 31st. Sentinels is a game for 1 to 5 players, plays in about 30 to 60 minutes. Complexity is medium heavy, and the risk associated with this campaign we're going to set at medium low. Now, Sentinels is a hand management fighting game. It's cooperative. I wouldn't quite call it deck building because you're not actually adding to your deck. You will cycle through your deck and take cards, and you may use those cards for various things or put them out into your tableau, and you'll be making choices, kind of like you would in a deck builder. But the main difference is you're not actually adding cards into your deck. And I think other than that, though, it plays very similarly to games like Aeon's End, which actually is a deck builder, and I think it has a lot in common with Marvel Champions, the card game. So for me personally, I've played Sentinels, the new version. I played it a couple weeks ago, and I really, really like it. And I'm really looking closely at backing this. However, I have everything in the world for Aeon's End, and I also have a lot of stuff for Marvel Champions. So I think for me, I'm probably not going to back this time around. I know that there's a lot of stuff, a lot of Sentinels of the Multiverse content out there, and I know that they are planning on putting out more and more of that content, which I think will happen in future Kickstarters. Now, I have a lot that I'm considering backing kind of this season, I guess. I know that last month, this month, there's a lot of stuff. So even though I'm very interested in Sentinels of the Multiverse, I think my plan, my tactic is going to be kind of delaying backing it and putting it off and waiting for a future campaign. And in the meantime, I'll probably start making my way through some of the Aeon's End content and then getting deep into Marvel Champions and seeing if that's a game that I really want to keep or not. I think if I decide, if I play through a lot of Marvel Champions and I decide that for whatever reason I don't want to hold on to it, it'll make it easier for me to pledge this one in the future because I think there's a lot of overlap and I'm not sure I need both games in my collection. However, I think Sentinels is a really good game and I really kind of want it in my collection. I know that my friend Ryan has already backed, the first time around. I believe he's backing this one, so I'll still get to play it. And eventually I do want to add it into my collection, but I think I'm going to be waiting for a future Kickstarter, hopefully at a time when there's less other things that I'm backing, that month or those months around that campaign. And also, hopefully, when that happens again in the future, I'll have less games in my collection that I feel or worry are kind of in conflict. Because, if you want that kind of a game and you have so many options of games to pull out, there are games that will never get pulled out. Now, the original game was published several years back, like I think 10 years back. It has a 7.2 on Board Game Geek. There were some issues with the art in that version, and I think even more so, some of the text and the way that abilities and things were communicated to the players. So, although I know people really liked the earlier version of the game, there was a barrier to entry because it was kind of hard to process a lot of the stuff that was on the cards and to understand how everything worked together. That's all been cleaned up with the new version, and the new version is currently sitting on Board Game Geek with an 8.6. And I think that, jump up in score really reflects the improvements that they've made to the game. So again, if this is a game that you've been interested in the past, I think you should have a lot of confidence going into this, knowing that this is the best version of the game and that it looks like Greater Than Games is going to continue supporting it in the future with more and more Kickstarters and eventually, replacing all of that old content with new versions of it. And the way they've been doing that, it isn't kind of a one-for-one. Like the new version of Sentinels of the Multiverse, the base game, has a lot of stuff taken from some of the other expansions and kind of mixed in. So I think they'll eventually get to everything, but they're going to be kind of mixing and matching things, sprinkling in things from one expansion with other expansions. It's not just going to be like a one-for-one package as they go along and upgrade stuff. Just something to be aware of. Now, the new game, like the old game, is designed by Christopher Bedell. He's previously worked on Sentinels of the Multiverse, Sentinels of the Multiverse Definitive Edition, and Sentinel Tactics, The Flame of Freedom. Really, these guys got their start doing Sentinels of the Multiverse, and that's what they've been doing. So they've done several different games, several different iterations, and they're still on board bringing all of that knowledge and refining it for this newer version of the game. Adam Rebataro is also back as a designer. He also worked on those same games as a designer, but he's also the artist. And as an artist, he's worked on the original Sentinels of the Multiverse, Sentinel Tactics, The Flame of Freedom, and Spirit Island. And this new version of Sentinels of the Multiverse is being published by Greater Than Games. They did the original Sentinels of the Multiverse. They've also put out Spirit Island and TAC. Now, there's not too many pledges with this campaign. Essentially, there's 4 of them. There's one pledge that's the new stuff, another pledge that is the new stuff plus the definitive version of the base, and then you repeat those pledges again with sleeves. So for $50, the definitive Renegades pledge, you're going to be getting the new Rook City expansion as well as the foil promo pack 2. For $120, which is the Sentinels plus Renegades pledge, you're going to be getting the same thing in the $50 pledge, but you'll also be getting the new definitive base game Sentinels of the Multiverse along with foil promo pack 1. Now, if we step that up to the more expensive pledges that include sleeves, for $120, which is Renegades with sleeves, you're going to be getting the new expansion and foil promo pack 2 and sleeves. And they list the number of sleeves there at 850. So I believe that's just enough sleeves for the new expansion. For $265, Renegades and Sentinels with sleeves, that's the same thing as the second pledge. So you're getting both games, the base game, the new expansion, both foil promo packs, and then you're getting 900 sleeves. Now they listed at 900 sleeves. I don't think that's quite right because it wouldn't make sense to me if the total number of sleeves was only 50 sleeves more than the expansion. We know there's a lot more cards than that in the base game. So what I believe that means is that you're getting 900 sleeves for the base game plus 850 sleeves for the new expansion for a total of 1,750 sleeves. Now you can also add on more versions of those pledges as add-ons, and the versions of those pledges as add-ons are going to be $50, $70, $120, and $145. What you'll notice there is that the first and third amounts are identical to the pledges themselves. So those are both the pledges that include just the new expansion. If you're getting the kind of 2 pledges that include the base game along with that, when you go to the version of that that's an add-on, it's actually significantly cheaper. And so I think they're trying to save people some money who are, just going all in and getting multiple copies of everything. So your second copy, if you're doing more than one, of the 2 pledges that include the base game will be fairly significantly reduced. Continental US shipping is being estimated at $16, and Greater Than Games is currently planning on delivering the new Sentinels expansion in January of 2023. Next on the list is Solar 175. They had a minimum required funding goal of $33,000. They're currently at $178,000, which is about 5.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Solar is a game for 1 to 5 players, plays in about 40 to 120 minutes. Complexity is medium heavy, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at high. So I know that Solar 175 is an ambitious game. It's been in development for, I think, at least 6 years. They're kind of new designers working on this one. That's why the risk is high. But I'm personally pretty impressed by what I've seen from them. Solar 175 has bag building, area control, worker placement. The designers have compared it to El Grande meets Orleans. It's got a space theme though, and it's a legacy campaign with dozens of hours of content and multiple endings. It's designed by Joseph N. Adams and Madeline Adams. Previously, they've worked together on Philosophia, Dare to be Wise, and Philosophia Floating World. The art is by Adam Beachy and Tithi Ladthwang, who's previously worked on Human Punishment: The Beginning and Human Punishment: Social Deduction 2.0. as well as art from Metacorp and RM Studio. And the publisher here is Cogito Ergo Meeple. It's the Adams Company. It's published both of their games, the Philosophia games. For $89, you can pledge the Solar 175 Retail Edition. For $111, you can pledge the Solar 175 Deluxe Edition, which is going to upgrade to metal tokens, as well as add in a 5th player expansion. The third and final pledge for this campaign is $123. It's called the All-In Deluxe Pledge, and that's going to add another game onto it. It's the Gonza Index dice game. It's just a separate game that they've also produced that they're offering along with this Solar 175 campaign. As far as add-ons go, for $6 you can add in premium sleeves. That's 140 sleeves. It should be enough for all the cards in the game. For $19 you can add in a recharge pack. So essentially that's going to recharge the legacy campaign. So whatever you kind of do to alter things in your campaign, if there's cards that you're told to rip up and whatnot, you'll get new components to replace those things so you can have a new campaign. And then for $29, you can add on a big neoprene mat. Continental US shipping is being estimated at $11, and Cogito Ergo Meeple is planning on delivering this game in April of 2023. So this is another one that is more than a year off. Just barely. The final game on my list for today is Small City Deluxe Edition. And again, this is also going to fund on Thursday, March 31st. Small City had a minimum required funding goal of $39,000. They're currently at $100,000, which is about 2.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Small City is a game for 1 to 4 players, plays in about 1 to 3 hours. Complexity is heavy, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium low. Now, this is a city building game. It uses tile placement and worker placement, and it's very similar in look and style to Alban Viard's previous big kind of game that he's been working on getting out lately over several Kickstarters called Clinic Deluxe Edition. So there was an older version of Clinic. He did a new upgraded version with art by Ian O'Toole, one of my favorite artists. And he's done several campaigns putting out various extension packs with expansion material. And I think that's done so well for him that he's now taken the same kind of upgrade format, redesign, reworking, retweaking, and applying it to Small City. For this one, he's got Kwanchai Maria on the art, and he considers this game, Small City, his magnum opus. So if you've played the new Clinic Deluxe, if that appeals to you, I think you know what you're in store for with this one. And I think you should also know that Alban Viard considers Small City his best game. So things to be aware of if you like Clinic and you're considering this one. The original Small City was published in 2015. It currently has a 7.5 rating on Board Game Geek. I think that's pretty good. I think that's pretty solid, especially considering, you know, the lower production value of the first one. And I don't want to say it has bad art, but it certainly doesn't have art as attractive that pops as much as Kwanchai Maria art. Now, as I said, this game is designed by Alban Viard. He's previously done Clinic Deluxe Edition, Small City, the original, and Tramways. And the art here is by Kwanchai Maria, who's worked on Cryptid, Dinosaur Island, In the Hall of the Mountain King, the new version of Sidereal Confluence, and Under Falling Skies. And this new version is being published by AV Studio Games. That's Alban Viard's company, AV Studio Games. And they have published Clinic Deluxe Edition, Small City, the original, and Tramways as well. The same games that Alban's designed. Now, there aren't too many pledge levels on this one. For $69, the Architect pledge, you're going to get the new upgraded version of Small City. If you pledge at $99, the Mayor, you will add in the Winter expansion along with the base game. Continental US shipping is being estimated at $17 for the base game, $19 for the $99 bundle with the base game and the expansion. And finally, AV Studio Games is delivering the new Small City Deluxe Edition in February of 2023. So that wraps up 9 different campaigns. I'm excited about a lot of these, and you'll have to come back next week and see which of these I pledged. You can play a guessing game down in the comments and try to figure out what you think I'm going to pledge. There's no campaigns that I personally pledged from last week's video because there were no campaigns in last week's video. There was just nothing that I was excited about or thought was good enough that I wanted to recommend to you guys and pass along. So no personal pledges for me from last week's video. And I only had one thing arrive. It wasn't actually a game. It was the playmat for Architects of the West Kingdom. So they had an expansion campaign recently. I pledged the expansion. It's now delivering. I got the playmat first, and I still don't have notification of the expansion, so it should be arriving soon. And I'll probably be talking about that one next week's Kickstarter Weekly or the week after, just depending on when it comes in. So that's going to wrap up the video for this week. If you haven't checked out my series that's currently running on my most anticipated games of 2022, you might want to give that a look. I will link the first video in the series down below. That's going to just talk about my 10 honorable mentions. Videos 2 and 3 will cover my 50 most anticipated expansions and redesigns or kind of new printings of older games. And then videos 4 through 8 cover 20 games apiece. Together they make up my 100 most anticipated games of 2022. I have the 7th video that I'm currently working on. I'm actually going to try to get that up before this one. So hopefully when you watch this video, the 7th video in the 2022 anticipated games will already be up. Some of that's just going to depend how the editing goes because I don't want to delay this video too much. But both of those should be getting published within a day of each other. And then the final 8th video in the series will be going up during the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of this coming week. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care, have a great week, and I'll see you again very soon.